David Aiken with Checkerhead Brewing and another tips and tricks video for brewing enthusiasts around the world. Here in Shirley, Vancouver Island, British Columbia, Canada, and right behind me you can see what I like to refer to as the Wall of Green. 16 different varieties of hops that are at this point growing, I'd say 24, 25 feet, so 5 or 6 meters up in the air. Started popping through the ground in March. We're at the end of June right now. They're going to keep going, growing that is, until about the middle of July when they start producing the cones, and then their energy really goes into producing the cones. And about middle of August you can start to harvest, and then harvest can, depending on the variety, go sort of up until about the middle of September. Now, depending on where you are in the world, your harvest may happen at different times, but if you are growing your own hops and you're wondering how to best take advantage of them in the brews that you're making yourself, well, this video is going to give you a couple little tips. We're going to talk about why we use hops in the first place, what the active ingredient is that we're really chasing and where it's located, and then how to sort of figure out what's going to work best for you. We're all in this to make great beers, so let's get to it. So why do we use hops? Well, basically the hops are providing a bitter component that acts as a counterpoint to the sweetness that we get from the malt and the sugars that are extracted during the brewing process. So you've got sweet from malt, bitter from hops. But are hops the only thing you could use? And well, quite frankly, the answer is no. Before hops became super popular and synonymous with beer, brewers used to use what was called a gruit. And it's awesome. These ingredients, I went onto Wikipedia and downloaded them. I wrote them down just so I'd have them for you. Gruit is often made up of sweet gale, mugwort, yarrow, ground ivy, horehound, and Kelowna heather. Now, those ingredients to me sound like a potion from Harry Potter, but the reality is that the governing bodies couldn't really control how much of each of those got used during the brewing process, so the Reinheitsgebot 1516 German purity law stated that you could only use water, malt, and hops. They didn't include yeast initially, but yeast was eventually added to the 4 ingredients that you're allowed to put in, unless you're from Belgium, in which case you can put anything you want into your beer. Now, those 4 ingredients allowed the governing bodies to sort of track what was being used in each of the beers that was being produced, and is that to be pure, or is that so that they can get taxes? I'll let you be the judge. The point being that the bitterness is what we're trying to extract from hops to give a counterpoint to the malt and the sweetness that is provided by the malt. Where in the hop is that bitterness exactly? Well, the answer is in the lupulin powder. Lupulin is a resinous, yellow, sticky powder that develops as the cone matures. And you'll get a good sense as to whether the hops are actually ready to pick or not by how much lupulin is actually inside of the cone. So you want to break it open with your fingers and then take a look and see how much of that yellow powdery stuff is there. And what is in that yellowy powder? Basically all the essential oils that you're going to be trying to extract when you're brewing, as well as the alpha and beta acids that determine how much bittering effect that hop has on your beer. So if you're buying commercial hops, that information is usually listed on the package. So a bittering hop would be sort of in the 12 to 16% alpha acid range, and your sort of more aroma hops are in the lower range, anywhere from say 4 to 8% alpha acids will give you a good aroma hop addition. Although you can use bittering hops as aroma hops as well, so you've got a choice as to what you do. Right, so I've been talking about alpha acids and beta acids and lupulin powder and aroma hops and bittering hops. Where does it all break down? Where does it really matter in the final product? 2 things to consider. Number 1, the higher the alpha acid, the greater the perceived bitterness that's going to be added to the beer. Number 2, the longer that hop is in the boil, the more bitterness is going to be imparted to the beer. So high alpha acids and a long boil is going to get a lot more bitterness than a low alpha acid at a late addition. So you have to balance it out, and brewing software can be really good for determining how much of that bitterness is being imparted to your final product. But if you're using homegrown hops, how do you determine the alpha acids? How do you figure out how much bitterness is going to be contributed, and at what point of the boil you should make those additions to get the very best out of the fresh hops that you're growing at home? Well, there are 3 ways to go about doing it as far as I'm concerned. Number 1, you can go online and look at what the average hop alpha acids are for any given variety, and I'll link to that in the notes below so you can take a look at it. I figure that within a percentage or 2, given small amounts that we're talking about for a small homebrew scale, it's not going to make a huge difference, but for some people it's super important. So if you want to get a little bit more technical with it, I suggest making a hop tea. Make a hop tea with your hops and put it side by side against another set of hops that you have an alpha acid reading for. I'll link to a great video on how to make hop tea, and then use your tongue as the guide to compare those two alpha acid ratings and figure out what the bitterness of one is compared to the other, and then make your contributions based on that. Or the third option, and I'll link to a great video on this as well, send your hops in and actually have them tested. There are places that will scientifically figure out exactly what your alpha and beta acids are in the homegrown hops that you have. And for the people who are super anal about trying to figure out exactly what's going on, that may be the best course of action. Now, the only problem is you're going to take a good proportion of your hops, I mean, depending on how many you're growing, and sending them in to be tested, which means less hops to brew with. Which kind of begs the question, is it worth it? Is it worth really needing to have that? I mean, if you were, say, Coors or Budweiser or Molson Canadian or something like that, and you had to reproduce your beer every single time exactly the way the customer expected it to be, sure, then I can see the point in doing it. But on the smaller scale, and especially for yourself, as long as you're within a range that is acceptable for what you're doing and you're producing a beer that you really like the taste of, to me, that's more important. And I think for the experience of, having a hop that you grew yourself that you're able to use in your beer, there's just something really satisfying about it that takes over the need to be hyper critical about getting it exactly the same every single time. In fact, sometimes you'll get something great, sometimes it'll be close to great, but the journey is as much a part of this process as anything else. Thanks for watching the video. My name's David Aiken with Checkerhead Brewing, and no matter where you are in the world, I hope this video has helped you. If it has, hit like, hit subscribe, and wherever you are, I hope you have a great brew day. Take care, everyone. We'll see you next time.